Daniel Reyes had $12 left in checking when he saw Claire Voss stumble against the concrete pillar of a downtown Denver parking garage, and every sensible part of him told him to keep walking. He needed Summit Grid energy more than Summit Grid needed him. His daughter needed a new spacer for her inhaler. The landlord had raised the rent again, and the transmission in his 12-year-old Subaru had begun making a noise that sounded expensive. Daniel was 36, a compliance analyst whose name appeared on reports nobody important read. He was also the man who had just watched one of Summit Grid's most powerful investors close his hand around Claire's wrist while she said, very clearly, no. 30 feet away, snow blew through the open side of the garage in silver sheets. Victor Shaw stood between Claire and a black Range Rover, smiling the way powerful men smiled when they expected the world to cooperate. Claire was the founder and CEO of Summit Grid, a renewable energy company, valued at nearly $4 billion. She was famous for firing executives before breakfast and correcting engineers from memory during board meetings. Tonight, however, her silver gown was creased, one heel was twisted, and she was struggling to remain upright. Victor leaned closer. You're in no condition to argue. Get in the car. Claire pulled back. I said I'm not going with you. Daniel should have turned around. He had no savings, no influential friends, and an 8-year-old girl asleep at his sister's apartment, waiting for him to pick her up. Victor could end his career with one phone call. Claire could fire him merely because he had witnessed her humiliation. Daniel knew the calculation. He also knew what he was looking at. So he stepped into the light and said, Ms. Voss, security asked me to bring you downstairs. Victor's head turned slowly, the pleasant expression disappearing from his face. Who are you? Daniel kept walking until only 6 feet separated them. He did not square his shoulders or clench his fists. Men like Victor understood aggression, because aggression gave them permission to answer with more of it. Daniel needed uncertainty. Daniel Reyes, Grid Compliance. He looked at Claire rather than Victor. Your transportation is waiting by the 14th Street entrance. They couldn't get through the gala traffic. It was nonsense. Daniel had no idea whether Claire had a driver. The Summit Grid winter benefit had occupied 3 floors of a luxury hotel across the street, and he had slipped out through the garage because the mandatory celebration had already cost him a babysitting favor and $28 for parking. Victor tightened his grip. Her driver left. I sent him home. That told Daniel more than Victor realized. Then hotel security will be interested in why he left without her. Victor's eyes hardened. You're confused about your place here. Daniel's stomach twisted. He could already imagine Monday morning. Badge disabled, health insurance canceled, cardboard box on his desk. Probably, he said, but the security supervisor is waiting for me to confirm she's safe. If I don't call him in the next 2 minutes, he's coming up with 2 Denver police officers working the event. Claire lifted her head. Her eyes, usually photographed as calm and almost severe, were unfocused but alert enough to recognize the opening Daniel had created. Let go of me, Victor. Victor stared at Daniel for a long second. Then he released her so abruptly that Claire staggered sideways. Daniel caught her elbow, keeping his touch light. Victor adjusted his tuxedo jacket. You just bought yourself a very short future at Summit Grid. Daniel believed him. Maybe. Victor opened the Range Rover door, then glanced back at Claire. You'll regret making this ugly. Claire's voice was weak, but the words were sharp. It became ugly when you decided my answer didn't matter. Victor drove away without another word. The moment the taillights disappeared down the ramp, Claire's knees nearly gave out. Daniel caught her before she struck the concrete. She was shivering so hard he felt it through his jacket. Can you stand? He asked. Of course I can stand. She tried and immediately swayed into him. That's encouraging, Daniel said. Can you walk? Don't be funny. I'm not brave enough to be funny with you." Something that might have been a laugh escaped her, then turned into a groan. Daniel guided her toward the elevator, but when the doors opened, Claire recoiled from the mirrored interior. "No lobby," her words dragged together. "People." He understood. The gala was still spilling executives, politicians, donors, and local reporters onto the sidewalks. Claire Voss did not want to become tomorrow morning's photograph. Daniel took them down one level instead, to a service exit beside a shuttered coffee kiosk. Outside, the storm had thickened. He ordered a ride share, watched 3 drivers cancel after seeing the downtown traffic, then finally convinced a 4th to stop near the alley. Claire made it halfway into the back seat before whispering, "I'm going to be sick." Daniel pulled her back out and got her behind a low retaining wall seconds before her stomach rebelled. He held her hair away from her face while snow collected on his shoulders. When she finished, she crouched there, breathing hard, ashamed enough that she would not look at him. Daniel removed a packet of tissues from his coat. He carried them because his daughter, Ava, could somehow turn any meal into an emergency requiring napkins. "Here." Claire accepted them with shaking fingers. "This never happened." Daniel looked toward the road. "I'm not interested in telling anybody. You don't understand." "I understand enough." He helped her upright. For the first time, her hand closed around his sleeve, not because she was falling, but because she needed something steady. "Please," she whispered. "I can't have them see me like this." Daniel answered quietly. "Then they won't." Claire lived in a restored brick warehouse overlooking Cherry Creek, not the glass penthouse Daniel had expected. The building had a private underground entrance, and the overnight concierge recognized her immediately. His alarm sharpened when he saw Daniel supporting her. "Ms. Voss? What happened?" Daniel transferred her weight carefully. "She got sick at the benefit. She needs water and somebody to make sure she doesn't fall." The concierge looked suspiciously at him. "Your name?" "Daniel Reyes. I work at Summit Grid." Claire opened her eyes. "He's fine, Martin." The concierge's expression changed instantly. Daniel stepped back. His obligation was over. He should have felt relieved, but Claire watched him with an intensity that made him uneasy. "Daniel," she said, testing the name as though filing it somewhere. "Yes? You lied to Victor. A little. There were no police officers. No. Security wasn't waiting. Also no." Her mouth moved slightly. "That was reckless. I've been called worse." She stared at him another second before the concierge led her toward the elevator. Daniel walked back into the snow and checked his phone. It was 1:47 a.m. There were 2 messages from his sister asking where he was, and 1 photo of Ava asleep on a couch with a paperback about volcanoes open across her chest. Daniel stood beneath the awning, exhausted enough to feel hollow. His wool coat smelled like wet pavement and somebody else's expensive perfume. The parking app had charged him an additional $18. He had also paid the rideshare fare because Claire had been incapable of finding her phone. His bank balance was now negative. Yet the money frightened him less than Victor's final look. Daniel knew exactly how disposable he was. He spent his days identifying safety discrepancies in solar installations and battery storage sites, then sending reports to managers who often considered him an obstacle to schedules and bonuses. He had no executive sponsor, no political protection. On Monday, Victor Shaw would tell someone to remove Daniel Reyes, and someone would do it. Daniel started the Subaru, listened to the transmission grind, and drove to collect his daughter. The weekend became an exercise in pretending. Saturday morning, Ava sat cross-legged at their small kitchen table, building a model wind turbine from cardboard, while Daniel made pancakes from a mix that technically had expired 2 months earlier. "You keep checking your phone," she said. "Work stuff. On Saturday? Work doesn't know what day it is." Ava considered that, then held up a crooked paper blade. "That sounds like a work problem." Daniel smiled despite himself. She had inherited his habit of observing more than adults wanted her to. He had been raising her alone since her mother left Colorado 4 years earlier, after deciding she could not manage marriage, parenthood, and the life she wanted at the same time. She called Ava every few weeks and sent gifts on birthdays, but Daniel handled inhalers, homework, dentist appointments, nightmares, forgotten lunchboxes, and every ordinary emergency in between. That was the part Claire Voss could never know. Daniel had not confronted Victor because he possessed unusual courage. He had done it because, for several terrifying seconds in the garage, he had imagined Ava at 22 instead of 8. He had imagined her saying no while a stranger calculated that her fear mattered less than his power. Once that image entered his mind, walking away became impossible. Sunday evening brought no email from Human Resources, no termination notice, no threatening call. That silence was somehow worse. At 7:10, Monday morning, Daniel left Ava at school, crouched to zip her coat, and held her longer than usual. "Dad," she complained, laughing, "I need oxygen." "Right, sorry. Are you getting fired?" Daniel stared at her. "Why would you ask that?" "You organized the pantry yesterday." She shrugged. "You only clean stuff when you're worried." He almost laughed. "I'm not planning on getting fired." "Good. We need groceries." That was Ava, 8 years old and accidentally merciless. Daniel promised to buy milk, returned to the car, and drove toward Summit Grid's headquarters, expecting his badge to fail. It worked. The green light at the lobby turnstile seemed almost insulting. Daniel rode to the 16th floor, past the engineering teams, and sat at his narrow workstation between a fire door and a copier that jammed twice a day. At 9:42 a.m., his desk phone rang. "Daniel Reyes?" asked a woman whose voice he recognized from company-wide meetings. "This is Helen Park, Ms. Voss's chief of staff. She'd like to see you upstairs." Daniel glanced toward his manager, who had stopped typing. Now? Now. The executive floor occupied the top of the building and felt less like an office than a museum designed to discourage touching things. Concrete walls, polished oak, quiet conference rooms, photographs of Summit Grid's first wind farm stretching across eastern Colorado. Helen met him at reception. "Go in." She offered no clue whether he was about to receive gratitude or a severance packet. Claire stood beside a window when he entered, wearing a navy suit and no expression. If Daniel had not seen her struggling to remain conscious in a snowy parking garage 48 hours earlier, he would have believed that version of her had never existed. "Close the door." He did. "Sit." Daniel sat. Claire remained standing. "Victor Shaw contacted our board chair at 6:12 this morning," she said. "He accused you of threatening him, fabricating a security emergency, physically interfering with a board investor, and humiliating him in public." Daniel's fingers tightened around the edge of the chair. "I didn't touch him." "I know." Claire turned from the window. "The garage has cameras." Daniel blinked. "You saw it?" "I saw enough." She walked behind her desk and placed one hand on a folder. "Victor expected me to protect the company from scandal by sacrificing an employee whose name nobody on the board recognized." Daniel's pulse hammered. And at 8:30 this morning, Summit Grid terminated every advisory agreement associated with Victor Shaw. Our attorneys also delivered preservation notices for the video, witness statements, and transportation records from Friday. Daniel stared at her. "You removed him?" Claire's eyes chilled. "He removed himself the moment he decided my refusal was negotiable." Daniel needed several seconds before he could speak. "He's one of the original investors." "He was. He controls voting shares." "Not enough." Claire sat across from him rather than behind the desk, which unsettled Daniel more than the formal arrangement would have. "There's another reason you're here." She studied his face. "I remember Friday night." Daniel looked down. "You don't have to explain anything." "I wasn't going to." Her answer was immediate. I'm telling you because I refuse to participate in the fiction that embarrassment erases reality. You saw me impaired. You saw someone exploit it. You intervened. Those facts remain true whether they make me comfortable or not. Daniel nodded cautiously. Claire continued. You knew who Victor was. Why did you step in? He was hurting you. That isn't an answer. People watch powerful men hurt people every day. Her voice carried no bitterness, only experience. You have no savings. Your credit report is terrible. Your salary barely covers your housing costs. You are supporting a child alone. You had more to lose than almost anyone in that garage. Daniel's discomfort sharpened. You checked my credit? I checked your employee file. Finance added the rest when I requested your compensation history. That's invasive. A faint spark entered her eyes. Good. You're willing to tell me that. Daniel rubbed his palms together. You want to know why? Yes. My daughter's name is Ava. She's 8. Claire waited. Friday night, I thought about her being older, maybe at college, maybe at a work party, maybe scared and not thinking clearly. And I thought about some guy deciding that because he had money or influence, her answer didn't count. Daniel swallowed. If that ever happens, I want somebody to help her, even if helping her is inconvenient, even if they're scared. Claire looked away for the first time. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter. That is an extremely dangerous way to make career decisions. I'm beginning to understand that. Good, she said, because I'm promoting you. The offer arrived 10 minutes later and made Daniel wonder whether Claire had mistaken him for somebody else. Director of Field Integrity. Base salary, $198,000. Annual incentive eligibility. Better health insurance. A private office on the 22nd floor. Authority to review operational risks across Summit Grid's wind, solar, and battery sites. Daniel read the letter 3 times. I'm not qualified for this. Claire folded her arms. You have worked here 6 years. Your performance ratings are excellent. That qualifies me to analyze reports, not run a department. The department has 9 people. You'll survive. Why me? Because last year you identified faulty thermal sensors at our Pueblo storage facility. Your manager downgraded your warning because replacement would delay commissioning. 3 months later, those sensors failed. Daniel frowned. He had never known the report reached Claire. Nobody was hurt, because you had documented a manual inspection procedure they were forced to follow. Your report saved us from a possible battery fire. She slid another folder toward him. You also flagged falsified maintenance hours at our Wyoming wind site, questioned a contractor relationship in New Mexico, and caught a $700,000 invoice error everyone else approved. Daniel stared at the pages. Claire had not promoted a stranger from a parking garage. She had gone looking for his work. Friday made me check, she said. Your record made me decide. That distinction mattered. Daniel still hesitated. People will think I got rewarded because of what happened. They will think whatever is most entertaining. Victor's allies might come after me. They probably will. Claire's refusal to reassure him was strangely reassuring. Then why accept? Daniel asked. I didn't ask whether you should accept. You sent an offer letter. Exactly. That's still a choice. Claire's mouth almost curved. I'm starting to suspect this promotion may become exhausting. Daniel looked again at the salary, thinking of Ava's inhaler, groceries, rent, and the car transmission. Then he thought about what Claire had said. She had checked his work. He signed. The promotion did not turn Daniel's life into a fantasy. It made his days longer, his mistakes more visible, and his co-workers suspicious. On his second morning upstairs, a regional vice president named Grant Hollis stopped Daniel beside the coffee machine. So, you're the garage hero. Daniel's hand froze over the sugar packets. I don't know what you mean. Sure you don't. Grant smiled without warmth. 6 years in compliance, then overnight you're a director. Must have been one hell of a performance. Daniel carried that sentence into Claire's office 15 minutes later. I want to resign. Claire looked up from her tablet. Denied. That isn't how resignation works. Then explain. Daniel told her what Grant had said. She listened, expressionless. And you care? I care because I have to manage people who think I traded silence for a title. Did you? No. Then make them wrong. Daniel's jaw tightened. Easy for you to say. No. Claire set the tablet aside. It is not easy for me to say. Half the business press thinks every decision I make is either emotional or calculated to hide emotion. If I fire somebody, I'm ruthless. If I protect somebody, I'm compromised. If I succeed, I'm cold. If I fail, they say the company finally discovered the cost of giving a woman too much control. Her voice remained calm, but something raw moved underneath it. You cannot control the story people invent when your existence inconveniences them. Daniel exhaled. So I just ignore it? No. You become useful enough that gossip looks stupid. She handed him a file. Start with this. A construction subcontractor at Summit Grid's newest battery project had reported 17 safety violations as resolved in less than 24 hours. Daniel knew immediately that was impossible. Claire watched him turn pages. Tell me what's wrong. You already know something's wrong. Yes. Then why are you asking me? Because I don't need another executive who guesses what answer I want. Daniel closed the file. Then give me 2 days. You have 1. It was infuriating. It was also the first job he had ever had where telling the truth appeared to be part of the assignment. Daniel drove to the project site outside Colorado Springs before sunrise. The official report claimed a subcontractor had replaced damaged grounding cables, repaired emergency lighting, retrained 22 technicians, and completed a full inspection before midnight. The signatures were perfect. The work was not. Daniel found temporary tape covering 1 damaged cable and discovered that half the listed technicians had been working on a different site 70 miles away. The site manager, a broad man named Curtis Bell, watched him photograph the repairs. You knew? Knew enough. You don't understand how commissioning works. I understand time. Daniel held up the report. You claim 500 labor hours were completed yesterday. We brought in extra people. No, you didn't. Curtis stepped closer. You know who owns this subcontractor? Should I? Grant Hollis's brother. There it was. Not a smoking gun, but a reason everyone else had looked away. By afternoon, Daniel had payroll records, security logs, and supplier timestamps showing that the repairs existed mostly on paper. He returned to Denver after dark and placed the evidence on Claire's desk. Grant's department buried it. Claire skimmed the first page. Are you certain? Enough to suspend operations tonight, not enough to accuse him of directing the fraud. Good distinction. Daniel expected satisfaction. Instead, Claire looked tired. Do you know why people eventually stop bringing leaders bad news? Because leaders punish them. Exactly. She signed the shutdown order. Tomorrow, Grant will tell me you overreacted. He'll explain that stopping the project costs $80,000 a day. He'll say the safety risk was theoretical. And what will you say? Claire met Daniel's eyes. I'll ask him what price he assigned to the technician who would have touched an improperly grounded line. The next morning, Grant was removed from project oversight pending investigation. His allies began making calls. Daniel had passed Claire's first test, but in doing so, he had stepped deeper into a fight he still did not understand. 3 weeks later, the first real crack appeared in Claire's armor. Because of a cardboard volcano, Ava's school held a science showcase on a Thursday evening, and Daniel had blocked his calendar 2 months earlier. At 4:55 p.m., Claire called him into a meeting about a turbine failure in western Kansas. By 5:20, 12 executives were arguing over replacement schedules, while Daniel checked the time every 90 seconds. At 5:31, Claire stopped mid-sentence. What? Daniel looked up. Nothing. You've checked your watch 7 times. Every face at the table turned toward him. My daughter has a science showcase at 6:30. Then why are you here? Because you scheduled this meeting, Claire stared at him, and you assumed that meant I wanted you to miss it? Daniel almost laughed. That is generally what an urgent executive meeting at 5 o'clock means. Claire closed her folder. Go. We aren't finished. We will still have broken turbines tomorrow. Ava only has one showcase, Daniel said before realizing he had spoken aloud. Claire's expression shifted. Exactly. He arrived at the elementary school with 6 minutes to spare. Ava stood beside a papier-mâché volcano, wearing safety goggles 3 sizes too large. You came! The surprise in her voice hurt more than Daniel expected. Of course I came. You said work was crazy. Work lost. 10 minutes later, as Ava poured baking soda into the crater, Daniel saw Claire Voss standing at the classroom door in a charcoal coat. He nearly dropped the cup of vinegar. What are you doing here? You left the failure projections in my conference room. Claire held up his folder. I was nearby. Daniel knew that was unlikely. Ava approached immediately. Are you Dad's boss? Yes. The really scary one? Daniel closed his eyes. Claire glanced at him. Apparently. Ava nodded approvingly. Good. He needs supervision. Claire laughed, sudden and unguarded, and half the parents in the room turned to look. Claire stayed 20 minutes. She asked Ava why her volcano had different layers painted along the cutaway side, listened seriously to the explanation, and corrected another parent who called magma lava before it reached the surface. On the drive home, Ava was quiet until Daniel asked, What? She likes you. Daniel nearly missed a light. She's my boss. That wasn't what I said. You're 8. I can still see. Daniel refused to continue the conversation, but Ava's observation followed him for days. Claire was different around him now, though not softer exactly. She argued just as aggressively, rejected his reports when his evidence was weak, and once sent back an entire presentation with the comment, "Stop writing like you're afraid someone will disagree." Yet she also began asking whether Ava's asthma was better in the winter. She remembered the date of the school field trip. She switched a late meeting after learning Daniel had no childcare. These were small things, but small things mattered to a man whose life had been built around making every obligation fit inside the same 24 hours. Daniel learned pieces of Claire in return. She had grown up outside Grand Junction, where her parents owned an electrical repair business that nearly collapsed during the recession. She had founded Summit Grid at 27 after convincing local ranchers to lease unused acreage for wind generation. Investors loved the idea and distrusted her. Men twice her age routinely suggested bringing in an experienced operator to make decisions while leaving Claire as the public face. Victor Shaw had been among the first to fund her expansion. He helped when nobody else would, she admitted one evening. For years, I confused that with loyalty. Daniel looked at her across the empty conference room. You thought you owed him. I did owe him. Not that. Claire went still. Daniel continued. Money doesn't buy the right to ignore somebody's boundaries. She stared at him for a long moment. You say obvious things like they're revolutionary, only around rich people. That earned him a smile, brief, but real. It also made Daniel understand why Victor's betrayal had cut deeper than simple misconduct. He had weaponized a debt Claire thought she could never fully repay. By January, Victor was gone, but his influence remained embedded inside Summit Grid. 3 directors had voted against terminating his advisory agreements. 2 senior executives resigned in protest afterward. Then the company's quarterly numbers began behaving strangely. Maintenance costs rose 11% without a corresponding increase in repairs. Revenue from 2 wind sites arrived weeks late. A battery facility in Utah showed unexplained equipment losses. Individually, each problem looked ordinary. Together, they looked designed. Claire summoned Daniel at 7:00 a.m. and dropped a stack of financial summaries onto his desk. The board meets in 9 days. If these numbers hold, we miss guidance by nearly 15%. Daniel flipped through the pages. That doesn't happen accidentally. Our CFO says weather, delayed interconnection payments, and higher contractor costs. Do you believe him? I believe weather exists. Daniel looked up. Claire stood with her arms folded tightly. What aren't you saying? Victor has been calling directors. Can he force you out? Not alone. But if the quarter looks like evidence that I've destabilized the company by removing experienced leadership, he can turn my decision against me. Daniel understood the elegance of it. Victor did not need to prove Claire had acted wrongly in the garage. He only needed to convince investors that firing him had made her reckless. The truth would become a footnote beneath financial panic. What do you want me to do? Find out whether the numbers are real. Finance already reviewed them. Finance reviews what departments submit. Claire leaned toward him. You taught me something in Colorado Springs. Paperwork can be perfect while the cable underneath it is still broken. Daniel felt the weight of the request. He was no longer being asked to inspect a project or expose one manager. I was being asked to verify the health of a $4 billion company before a board meeting that could remove its founder. And if the numbers are real? He asked. Claire's face settled into that old, controlled stillness. Then I walk into the meeting and take responsibility for them, even if they fire you, especially then. Daniel spent the next 4 days following money through systems designed to hide human decisions behind accounting categories. He slept in short stretches, ate vending machine pretzels for dinner, and called Ava every night from his office. On the 5th evening, she asked, Are you saving the world? No. Your company? Maybe. That sounds less fun. She was right. By midnight, Daniel had proven that the revenue delays were legitimate. The maintenance increase was partly legitimate too, but the equipment losses bothered him. Summit Grid had supposedly written off more than $6 million in damaged battery modules after a warehouse incident outside Salt Lake City. Daniel called the warehouse supervisor directly. Which fire? The man asked. Daniel sat upright. The December incident. There wasn't a fire in December. Your records show a suppression discharge and damaged inventory. We had a false alarm in November. Nothing was damaged. Daniel opened another screen. The write-off had been approved by a temporary asset committee created 6 weeks earlier. 2 members had ties to Victor. Daniel traced shipping serial numbers and found something stranger. Several destroyed battery modules had been scanned at a freight terminal in Nevada 2 weeks after they were written off. Someone had not merely manipulated accounting. They were moving valuable equipment out of Summit Grid's control, recording it as damaged, and selling or transferring it elsewhere. He called Claire at 1:18 a.m. I found something. How bad? Her voice was instantly awake. I don't know yet. That usually means bad. $6 million may only be the part I can see. Claire was silent. Can you prove who authorized it? Not yet. Then don't tell anyone. Not even finance? Especially not finance. Daniel felt cold. You think the leak is inside executive leadership. I think Victor survived 20 years by knowing which doors opened before he knocked. She paused. Daniel, be careful. It was the first time she had sounded worried for him rather than for the company. The danger became personal the following afternoon when Daniel returned from lunch and found his office door open. Nothing obvious was missing. His laptop remained docked. Ava's school picture still leaned against the monitor, but the red notebook, where Daniel kept handwritten cross-references, had shifted from the left side of his desk to the right. He never put it there. Daniel checked the hallway camera with building security. At 12:26 p.m., a facilities employee entered using a master badge. The employee claimed to be responding to a temperature complaint Daniel had never made. 20 minutes later, Daniel received an email from an anonymous account containing a photograph of Ava leaving school with the message, "You have a good life. Don't let office politics damage it." Daniel's vision narrowed. He called the school, confirmed Ava was safely inside, then drove there himself. He found her in the library reading on a beanbag chair. "Dad?" She looked alarmed. "What happened?" Daniel crouched and hugged her. "Nothing. You're squeezing me." He loosened his arms. "Sorry. Did somebody die?" "No." "Then you're being weird." Daniel laughed shakily. That evening, he told his sister enough to arrange for Ava to stay with her for several nights. He did not tell Claire until after Ava was secure. Claire read the threatening email in complete silence. Then she picked up her phone. "I'm calling the police." "That could spook whoever sent it." "Good." "Claire, no." Her voice sharpened. "You do not get to decide that protecting my company is worth risking your daughter." Daniel looked at her. "They want me to stop." "Then stop." "You wouldn't. This is different." "Because it's me?" The question hung between them. Claire's composure faltered. "Because Ava did not choose any of this." Daniel could not argue with that. He agreed to give detectives the message and promised not to investigate alone. What he did not promise was to walk away. The threat changed the stakes. Now he knew somebody was frightened enough to reach outside the office. That meant he was close. The breakthrough came from Ava, though she never knew it. 2 nights later, Daniel sat at his sister's dining table pretending to help with homework while his mind cycled through asset numbers. Ava was drawing a map of Colorado watersheds and complaining that 2 rivers on the worksheet used different names in different places. "It's confusing," she said. "They should pick one name." Daniel stared at her. "Say that again." "They should pick one name?" His pulse jumped. He opened his laptop. The battery modules had been tracked by manufacturer serial number, internal asset number, and shipping pallet ID. Daniel had followed the serials. What if the people moving them had changed one identifier, but not all 3? He searched archived freight records by pallet ID instead. The trail appeared instantly. "Oh," Daniel whispered. Ava looked over. "Did I save the world?" "Maybe the company. Still less fun." Daniel spent the next 6 hours rebuilding shipments across 3 states. The supposedly destroyed battery modules had been transferred through a Nevada logistics company, then resold to a development firm purchasing equipment for a new energy storage project in Arizona. That firm's ownership disappeared behind layered LLCs, but one registered agent also represented a private investment vehicle controlled by Victor Shaw's family office. More disturbing were the approvals. The asset write-offs, expedited transfers, and unusual contractor payments all carried authorization from Summit Grid's chief financial officer, Malcolm Reed. Daniel felt sick. Malcolm had worked beside Claire for 11 years. He had helped take the company public. He was the executive who assured the board that the quarter's losses were ordinary. At 5:40 a.m., Daniel called Claire. "I know where the equipment went." "Where?" "To Victor." Silence. And Malcolm signed the transfers. This silence lasted longer. When Claire finally spoke, the words were barely audible. "Are you certain?" "I have shipping records, approvals, reseller invoices, and corporate registrations." Claire breathed out slowly. "Bring everything." "Not to the office." "Where?" She gave him an address in Washington Park. "My house, 7 o'clock." Claire's home was nothing like Daniel expected. It was large but warm, filled with books, old photographs, and furniture that looked chosen rather than staged. A framed picture showed a teenage Claire wearing work gloves beside an older man holding electrical cable. Daniel noticed it while she reviewed the evidence at her kitchen island. She wore jeans and a gray sweater. Her hair tied loosely at the back of her neck. Without the office around her, she looked younger and more tired. "Malcolm knew," she said. "He had to. He approved every major transaction. He was there before Summit Grid had 50 employees." She placed both hands on the counter. "When investors wanted to replace me, Malcolm defended me." Daniel said nothing. Betrayal did not become easier merely because the proof was organized neatly. Claire flipped to the ownership records linking Victor to the Arizona project. They're stripping assets, inflating expenses, and depressing revenue. Then Victor points to the quarter as evidence that removing him damaged the company. He could push for a vote to replace you, then reverse the write-offs and make the numbers recover under new leadership. Which makes him look right. Daniel nodded. Claire laughed once, without humor. He always did love elegant revenge. She closed the folder. The board meeting is tomorrow. We should send this to outside counsel tonight. We will. She looked at him. And you are done. No. Daniel, somebody photographed Ava. Which is why this ends tomorrow. Claire walked around the island. Do you have any idea what I would do to myself if something happened to her because you helped me? The rawness in her voice stopped him. Daniel answered softly, Probably the same thing I'd do if I walked away and let these people win because they scared me. That isn't fair. No, it isn't. They stood inches apart, anger and fear tangled between them. Then Claire whispered, You make it very difficult for me to keep people at a safe distance. Daniel understood she was no longer talking about Victor, Malcolm, or the board. He should have stepped back. She was his CEO. He was her employee. Their lives were connected by a night neither of them had chosen and a promotion that already made people suspicious. Instead, Daniel looked at the woman who could silence a room of investors and saw the same person who had once clung to his sleeve in a snowstorm because she was afraid strangers would see her vulnerable. You keep calling distance safe, he said. Has it actually kept you safe? Claire's eyes lowered. It kept me functional. That wasn't my question. You're becoming extremely irritating. That's in my performance review. A reluctant smile touched her mouth and vanished. Victor funded the first expansion when every other investor told me to find a male co-founder, she said. Malcolm stayed when our bank nearly called its loan. I trusted both of them because I thought people who helped build something would never deliberately destroy it. Daniel leaned against the island. People can do good things and still become dangerous later. You always reduce everything to these simple sentences. My life is mostly school pickup times and utility bills. Complexity is expensive. Claire looked at him, and the room became quiet. Friday night, she said. I remember thinking that if Victor got me into that car, nobody would question him. They would assume he was helping because he belonged in my world and you didn't. Daniel felt his jaw tighten. I remember seeing you and thinking you were going to walk away. I almost did. I know. She reached for his hand, hesitated, then touched his fingers. That matters more than if you had never been afraid. Daniel closed his hand around hers. For several seconds, neither moved. There was attraction, but beneath it was something slower and more dangerous. Trust. Claire rested her forehead briefly against his shoulder. Daniel put an arm around her. No kiss, no dramatic declaration. Just two exhausted people allowing themselves one quiet minute before the fight returned. Then Claire stepped back, wiped beneath one eye, and said, Tomorrow we destroy them. Daniel nodded. There's the boss I know. The board meeting began at 9:00 a.m., with Malcolm Reed presenting Summit Grid's worst quarterly performance in 7 years. Daniel sat along the back wall beside outside counsel while 12 directors studied charts showing missed revenue, inflated costs, and deteriorating margins. Victor was not physically present, but his influence occupied several chairs. Malcolm finished with a grave expression. The company remains fundamentally sound. However, recent leadership disruptions have clearly affected operational stability. Claire sat at the head of the table. Leadership disruptions? Malcolm's face conveyed reluctant concern. The departure of key advisors and executives created uncertainty. One director, Elaine Porter, folded her hands. Claire, nobody is questioning your intentions regarding Victor, but shareholders will ask whether personal conflict influenced decisions with material financial consequences. Daniel watched Claire absorb the insult. Personal conflict, as if the garage had been a disagreement between peers. Another director cleared his throat. There is a motion prepared to appoint an interim executive committee while we review management performance. The trap was closing exactly as Daniel predicted. Claire looked toward Malcolm. Before we vote, I have questions about the Utah asset write-offs. Malcolm barely reacted. We discussed those. We discussed damaged inventory. Correct. Interesting. Claire pressed a remote. The screen changed to a warehouse security log. Because the warehouse supervisor says no inventory was damaged. Malcolm's face tightened. Claire advanced again. Shipping scans appeared, then reseller invoices, then corporate registrations connecting the buyer to Victor's family office. The room lost its carefully managed calm. "What is this?" Elaine demanded. Claire's voice became almost gentle. "This is what happens when people assume operational employees do not compare finance reports with freight records." Malcolm turned toward Daniel. For the first time, Daniel saw fear. "These records are incomplete." Daniel stood. "They're not. You're a compliance analyst playing detective. Director of Field Integrity," Claire corrected, "and he found your signatures on 43 transfers." Malcolm tried denial, then technical explanations, then outrage. Each failed because Daniel had brought originals from systems Malcolm's team did not control. Pallet scans proved the equipment moved after being declared destroyed. Insurance documents showed Summit Grid had been prepared to submit claims for losses that never occurred. Vendor records traced consulting payments to businesses associated with 2 directors supporting Claire's removal. Outside counsel distributed sealed packets containing the evidence. "This meeting is now under legal privilege," the lead attorney said. "Nobody leaves with company devices until preservation protocols are complete." One director rose anyway. "You can't detain us." "No," Claire said. "But law enforcement downstairs can speak with anyone who wishes to explain why their authorization appears on fraudulent transfers." The room froze. Daniel had not known the police were there. Claire glanced at him once. She had learned from the parking garage, too. Real security was better than a bluff. Malcolm's shoulders collapsed. "Victor said this was temporary." Claire's expression did not change. "There it is." Malcolm looked around the table as if searching for an ally. The numbers were supposed to recover after the leadership transition. Nobody was stealing from Summit Grid permanently. Daniel stared at him. "You moved company equipment to a Victor-controlled project. It was collateral." "For what?" Malcolm said nothing. Claire answered. "For my removal." The motive became clear. Victor's group planned to force Claire out, install an interim committee, acquire undervalued shares during the turmoil, then return assets and improve performance under new leadership. It was not merely revenge, it was a takeover disguised as rescue. Claire stood. "The vote on my leadership is cancelled." Elaine nodded slowly. "Agreed." "No," Claire said. "Not because I'm asking. Because 3 directors have undisclosed conflicts that invalidate the motion." She looked toward the men involved. "Your resignations are on the table. Sign them, or we proceed directly to removal for cause." Nobody mistook the choice. Nobody mistook. By noon, Malcolm had been escorted from the building with counsel. 2 directors resigned. A 3rd was suspended pending investigation. Summit Grid issued a carefully worded statement announcing an internal fraud review and reaffirming Claire's leadership. Victor's representatives released a denial before reporters even knew the details, which only made him look more connected. Federal investigators would determine the eventual criminal consequences, but the corporate battle ended inside that boardroom. Daniel expected relief. Instead, he felt exhaustion so complete that his hands shook when he tried to pour coffee. Claire found him alone in the employee kitchen. "You should go home. I need to document the evidence chain. Legal has it. I should still—" "Daniel." He looked at her. "Go pick up your daughter." Something inside him loosened. He drove to his sister's house and found Ava at the table making a paper solar system. She ran to him. "Did you save the company?" Daniel lifted her into his arms. "A bunch of lawyers would object to that wording." "So yes, I helped." Ava leaned back. "Is the scary boss okay?" "She's okay. Are you okay?" Daniel thought about the last month. "I think so." Ava studied him with her serious brown eyes. "You look tired." "That's because I'm ancient." "You're 36. "Exactly." She groaned. "Can we get pizza?" Daniel checked his phone automatically, then stopped. For years, every small purchase had required calculation. He could afford pizza now. He could afford Ava's preferred inhaler. He could replace the failing Subaru. He could breathe without subtracting tomorrow from today. Yet none of those things felt like the biggest change. Somewhere along the way, Daniel had stopped viewing safety as the absence of risk. He had learned that some things worth protecting required choosing risk deliberately. "Yes," he said. "Pizza. The expensive kind." Ava gasped. "With breadsticks?" Don't push your luck. Claire did not appear at Daniel's apartment that night. She did not send champagne or some extravagant billionaire gesture. She sent one text. "Thank you." 2 words. Daniel understood how difficult they were for her. The following week, Summit Grid's board approved a permanent Ethics and Operational Integrity Division reporting jointly to the Audit Committee and CEO. Claire offered Daniel leadership of it with another salary increase. He declined the increase. Claire stared across her desk. "Nobody declines money. I have enough. That sentence is economically irrational. Ava's insurance is good. The bills are paid. I want more analysts and an independent reporting line instead." Claire leaned back. "You're negotiating my offer into a governance reform. You said you wanted useful. I may regret that." She approved both requests. Rumors about Daniel and Claire continued, but the nature of them changed. People noticed that he challenged her in meetings and remained employed. They noticed that Claire sometimes walked to Daniel's office instead of summoning him. They noticed Ava occasionally appeared after school and had somehow convinced the executive kitchen to stock chocolate milk. Claire remained careful around the child. She never tried to buy affection. She asked about school, attended a robotics competition when invited, and once spent 40 minutes helping Ava troubleshoot a small electric motor, only to discover Ava had intentionally reversed 2 wires because she wanted to see whether Claire would notice. "Your daughter tests people," Claire told Daniel afterward. "I have no idea where she gets that." Claire gave him a look. Their relationship advanced in equally cautious increments. Coffee after late meetings, dinner with Ava, a Saturday hike near Red Rocks where Claire wore ordinary boots and laughed when Daniel slipped on mud. They did not pretend the professional complications did not exist. Instead, Daniel transferred day-to-day compensation authority to the board committee, and Claire removed herself from his performance reviews. Boundaries did not kill what was growing between them. They made it possible to trust. The first time Claire kissed him happened 4 months after the board meeting, after Ava's robotics team won second place at a regional competition. They stood in the school parking lot while Ava celebrated inside with Daniel's sister. Spring had reached Denver late, and the air smelled of wet pavement and budding cottonwoods. Claire held Ava's plastic trophy because nobody else had a free hand. "Second place," she said. "She's furious. She gets that from you." "Excuse me?" "You both consider any ranking below first a clerical error." Claire laughed. Daniel watched her and remembered the woman in the parking garage, unsteady, frightened, humiliated, fighting to keep control because control had always been her armor. She was still formidable. She still terrified senior executives. But now Daniel knew she sang badly to old rock songs while cooking, hated olives, and kept every handwritten thank you note employees had ever sent her in a drawer she pretended not to care about. "What?" she asked. "Nothing. You're staring. I'm allowed." "Are you?" "I checked the policy." Claire stepped closer. "And?" No section on staring at CEOs. Compliance failure. I'll report myself. She kissed him before he could make another joke. It was gentle at first, almost questioning, and Daniel understood the question beneath it. Not, do you want me? They both knew the answer. The real question was whether trust could survive intimacy without becoming leverage. Daniel touched her cheek and kissed her back slowly. When they separated, Claire rested her forehead against his. This is inconvenient, she whispered. Extremely. Complicated. Definitely. Potentially catastrophic. You're really selling it. She smiled. I'm serious. Daniel looked toward the school doors where Ava would emerge any minute. So am I. Claire's expression softened. That is the problem. No, Daniel said. For once, I think that might be the solution. A year after the Winter Gala, Summit Grid held its next benefit in a renovated rail station instead of a luxury hotel. Attendance remained technically optional because Claire had personally ordered human resources to remove the phrase strongly encouraged from every invitation. Daniel attended anyway. His suit fit this time. The Subaru had been replaced by a sensible used SUV. Ava's asthma was controlled with medication their insurance now covered, and Daniel no longer checked his bank account before buying groceries. Ava spent the evening with his sister, after first making Daniel promise not to talk about boring electricity all night. The company had recovered the diverted equipment, settled several lawsuits, and posted its strongest safety record in its history. Victor remained entangled in investigations and civil claims. Malcolm had agreed to cooperate with authorities. None of it produced the clean satisfaction stories promised. Betrayal left scars. Trust returned slowly. Claire still became tense when somebody stood too close behind her at crowded events. Daniel still woke occasionally wondering whether his promotion could disappear as quickly as it came. Healing was not a victory speech. It was accumulation. One safe night, one honest conversation, one promise kept after another. Near 11, Daniel found Claire standing alone on a terrace overlooking downtown Denver. Snow had begun falling, light enough to disappear when it touched the railing. You disappeared, he said. I needed air. Daniel joined her. Below them, headlights moved through the city. Claire glanced sideways. Do you remember what you said in the garage? I lied extensively. You'll need to be specific. You said security was coming. That was one of the lies. No, she shook her head. Later. You told me to keep moving. Daniel remembered guiding her through the snow, counting steps because she could barely walk. 1, 2, 1, 2. I remember. Claire slipped her hand into his. I think that was the first time in years I believed somebody could stand beside me without wanting something. Daniel looked at their joined hands. I wanted something. Claire raised an eyebrow. What? I wanted to get home before Ava woke up. Claire laughed. The sound traveled into the cold night, warm and completely unguarded. Daniel had once believed courage belonged to people with resources, options, and backup plans. Men like him practiced a smaller kind of bravery, getting out of bed after 4 hours of sleep, paying one bill late so another could be paid on time, admitting fear while moving forward anyway. But the parking garage had taught him something he wanted Ava to understand someday. Sometimes life presented an equation with no safe answer. Protect yourself and lose the ability to respect the person you became, or step forward and risk what you could not afford to lose. Daniel had stepped forward because he imagined his daughter needing a stranger's decency. He could never have predicted what followed: the promotion, the threats, the conspiracy, the boardroom fight, or the woman beside him now. Claire squeezed his hand. Ava asked me something yesterday. That sentence makes me nervous. She wanted to know whether I'm coming to her birthday dinner. Daniel smiled. What did you say? I said I would if her father invited me. Manipulative. Efficient. Daniel turned toward her. Come to her birthday dinner. I'd like that. There will be 12 children and a cake shaped like Mars. Claire considered it. I have faced hostile boards. Nothing prepares you for fourth graders on frosting. She leaned against his shoulder. Below them, Denver glowed beneath the snow. Daniel no longer thought in terms of debts owed or favors repaid. Claire had not rescued him from poverty because he rescued her from Victor. He had not saved her company because she promoted him. They had simply chosen, repeatedly, to show up when the other person needed someone to step out of the shadows. And for the first time in years, Daniel's calculations were no longer about surviving tomorrow. They were about making room for a future. Sometimes the most important choices in life are the ones that make no sense on paper. Daniel had every reason to walk away that night. He had almost no money, a daughter depending on him, and a job he could not afford to lose. Yet when he saw someone's boundaries being ignored, he chose to step forward because he imagined what he would hope a stranger would do for his own daughter. That is the kind of courage this story reminds us to value. Not the courage of people who have nothing to lose, but the courage of ordinary people who are afraid, vulnerable, and still decide to do what is right. Real integrity is revealed when kindness has a cost, when speaking up carries consequences, and when helping someone offers no guarantee of reward. Daniel and Claire also show us that trust is not created by grand promises. It is built slowly, through honesty, respect, boundaries, and the decision to keep showing up for each other when life becomes difficult. In the end, success was not only about money, promotions, or defeating powerful enemies. It was about becoming the kind of person you can respect when you look in the mirror. If this story touched you, tell us in the comments. Would you have stepped forward even if you knew it could cost you everything? And if you believe courage and kindness still matter, subscribe to the channel for more stories that remind us what truly makes a life meaningful.